Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining our very first webinar about customer portals. Today, we're going to talk about how you can improve your customer service by integrating AI into your customer portal. Some of you might already be running a customer portal and might be wondering, okay, the idea of the customer portal was to improve self-service for our customers, but are still receiving quite a lot of incoming calls to, for example, your service center, right? And how is that coming? And today we're going to talk about the fundamentals of building or rebuilding your customer portals from the ground up using AI technologies to improve the self-service, right? My name is Jan Lemmens. I'm working at Amexio as a solution manager for our customer experience practice. And yeah, before we dive in, if you have any questions or you want to share your feedback on customer service or customer portals, feel free to use the chat. If we have time left in the end, we will try to answer these questions. Okay, so for today, we have selected an agenda. We have composed an agenda of 4 items we want to discuss. So first of all, we're going to take a look at what the typical pain points are in customer service for this from different perspectives and what the business impact is of these pain points. Next, we're going to talk about what the core pillars are that we think are crucial to have right when building or rebuilding your customer portal. Next, we're going to talk about how you can enable AI technologies in such a portal in different ways, both if you're more on a mature organization, but also if you are beginning with experimenting with AI. And in the end, we're going to talk about how to get started with these elements. All right. So, but first of all, let's start off with the pain points and the business impact. So we found out that when talking to our customers and discovering how they're using and implementing their customer portals, we found actually that customer service journeys nowadays are still often very broken. And we can look at this from 3 perspectives, right? From the customer's perspective, we see that the usability or the customer journey, as they call it, contacting, navigating through the customer portal, finding the answer to their questions, filing an issue, or in the end, if needed, trying to access customer support services, it's still a very distorted customer journey. On the customer service operation side, we see high operational costs because of inefficiencies in the way of working. And from an IT perspective, we see quite a lot of pain points concerning legacy technology, legacy platforms that are still in place, which prevent, for example, to integrate AI technologies in there. Gartner has done some studies on this, and they actually say that around only 14% of self-service journeys are actually successful, right? So there's a lot of room to improve your customer service through a customer portal by increasing this self-service. And we think that AI, if you look at new technologies like AI, they can help a lot in doing that, right? So we have 3 perspectives. We look at from the customer perspective, from the customer service support perspective, and from the IT perspective. So let's dive shortly into every one of these 3 and discover what actually is going on there. Okay. From a customer's perspective, we see a number of pain points. Like we mentioned before, sometimes it's not very easy for customers to find information in a customer portal because it is still very navigation based. And a classic search engine is often integrated in the portal, meaning it's working by using classic keyword search, which is not very efficient. And also the customer has to navigate manually to find the right information, to find the right application or sub-application in a portal. And if he cannot find it, maybe he needs to send an email or pick up the phone. It's not a very pleasant experience there. Sometimes even filling out paper forms in highly regulated environments. Often he has to navigate through disconnected channels. A mobile channel versus a web desktop channel is one thing, but also some of the organizations we look at, they have multiple customer portals standing next to each other because of history and acquisitions, for example, that these portals are not yet integrated well. And within a portal, customers are often needing to jump between different applications, which have different user interfaces. And yeah, it's not always the best experience there. Interfaces are often confusing and sometimes even not accessible if you're looking at, for example, keyboard navigation for people with disabilities. And in the end, what research shows is that customers will leave because of this. They will go to the competitors if they can get a better service and support, better experience there. So it reduces loyalty, right? So from a customer's perspective, for the end users, actually, this is what we see. And your end users can be your direct customers. But for example, if you're working in a B2B organizations, this could also be your dealers or your installers. These can be your customers too, and can use your portal to find, for example, documentation about products or frequently asked questions. In the service organization, we also see, like mentioned before, we see a lot of inefficiencies happening. And because of that, there is a high service cost. Because this service organization is often overloaded with questions coming in from customers because they cannot find the right information on the portal. So they're actually human FAQ pages, like we say that. So they lose a lot of time on that. And yeah, they need to staff these teams to cope with this, so the costs go up, right? That's the highest cost on customer support is the staffing. Inefficient way of working. Often we see that these teams need to copy paste information between systems, and there's not a lot of automation happening yet in these environments. And there's a lot of room for automation, we think. It's often an error-prone process because of the copy pasting, or maybe if they get a paper form filled out, they need to copy paste the values into a database, into our CRM system. That takes time and is prone to errors. Data governance, it's also an important element there. There is often a lack of a single document of record for the customers, right? Customer information is not always centralized in one document of record, which results in the customer calls in the first time, he needs to explain his issue, explain who he is, then he is put through another service team member, and he has to explain himself again because this information is not centralized. We even talked to one customer and saying that for every 50 new customers that they are gaining, they need to hire one additional support agent. And of course, this does not scale, right? So there's a lot of efficiency that can be gained in these service organizations. And on the IT side, the third element, we see a lot of legacy, like we mentioned before, and also silos. A lot of applications that are running next to each other. And it's very hard to integrate these legacy applications into a nice and consistent customer journey on the front end. And they're asking themselves, okay, how can I deal with this legacy landscape that I have? And what integration patterns are available for me to integrate my legacy applications in a customer support flow? They're also a bit afraid of a vendor lock-in that might be happening there. If you go for a single monolithical backend platform with including a front end, you can get locked into a certain vendor's roadmap quite quickly. That also has implications and unforeseen costs that might pop up down the road if prices are increased, for example, in a managed service or software as a service environment. And in the end, of course, security and compliance. So how can you ensure that customer data is stored safely, right? So these are from three perspectives, the typical pain points that we see in customer service. So from a customer's perspective, support organization's perspective, and IT perspective. So knowing these pain points, let's take a look at if you are trying to get started building a new customer portal or rebuilding your existing one, what are the core principles that you have to take into account? And we think that we believe there are three core pillars to get right. We often use this three-legged stool. If you cut out one leg of the stool falls over, right? So you have to get these three elements right. First of all, we think you have to deal in a customer-first manner, right? If you're building a customer portal, this is a solution for your customers. So you have to get a very good view of who your customers are. What are their needs? And what are their visions? And what are they struggling with every day when trying to get customer support, when trying to use your products or your service? This is very key. If you don't get this right, you will build features in your portal that customers don't need or won't use. Second element we think is important, and especially if you look into modern technology like AI, you have to build a modular architecture for your customer portal. Modular components that enable easy integrations, or enable integrations after all, provide scalability because technology is changing in a rapid pace. So your architecture needs to be ready for this. And of course, leveraging AI. We think that there is a tremendous opportunity in customer service to use AI technologies to get more efficient and to have to provide a better experience for the end customer. It also allows you to speed up your time to market, so to have a much faster time to market when building solutions, right? And we will see in a minute what we mean a bit about that. Okay, so putting the customers first, and this is true for most digital platforms or most digital projects. The user should not be you should have a very good view of what the user actually needs, what his pain points are, and you should not make any assumption about that. We see a lot of times assumptions are being made because organizations think they know what their customer needs or know who the customer actually is, and they make a lot of assumptions. And we think that assumptions, making too much assumptions, it will kill the adoption of a customer portal because you won't have a fit with the customer needs. So you should not make too much assumptions and try to listen to customers firsthand. You can do interviews, for example, but you can also use data that you can collect from your sales department, their experience, their feedback when talking to customers, or data that you have in your support organization already flowing in. If you already have a support organization, you can get a lot of data points there about questions that customers ask very frequently, issues that keep popping up, and address those right on. Second element is, before heavily investing in building features, building new capabilities, we always advise to test those capabilities before exposing them or before investing real development time and implementation time in these. So prototyping and small demos are very helpful here, and present these prototypes, for example, to the customer and see if you, for example, have multiple versions. You have a variant A and a variant B, which one works best for the customer, which is the most ergonomic, which solves the problem at best. So that's important to do, and we think using AI technologies, you can speed up that process. We will see in a minute. Also, involving customers directly in the process, it drives adoption, because the end users get the feel of ownership. So this drives the end adoption of the portal, and also make sure that you have a good retention. People start using the portal, but also keep using the portal because you provide them with highly relevant capabilities and features there. And you should be open to adapt yourself continuously. And like we just saw with the latest technologies, we see a much more rapid pace compared to, for example, 5 or 10 years ago on the technology side. So customer needs also keep evolving. For example, if you look at the usage of ChatGPT has skyrocketed. Google, for example, is pushing AI overviews in their search. It changes the expectations of the customer. It changes their behavior. Customers are now used to ask questions and are used to directly get an answer from the system. So these expectations are important to take into account. That also means that you should adapt continuously to what customers are actually expecting from such a solution. Okay, so but first let's dive a bit deeper into the second point here. So test small before big investments. We believe that actually AI-enabled prototyping can help a lot there. In the past, we used to do manual prototyping and manual composition of demos before we can show it to the customer. We would draw something together, a clickable prototype, for example, in Figma, or build a small throwaway prototype in an actual programming language, but it costs a lot of time. Typically, there is days or weeks going over building such a prototype. And yeah, it takes a while until you can collect feedback. But with the latest AI technologies, like, for example, Cursor or Claude Code, like we are using here at Amexio, we see a tremendous gain there in time. We can much more quickly create these prototypes without actually start real coding. With Claude Code, for example, we can use prompts to set up clickable prototypes very quickly, which we can test with the end customer. So this is not only a tool for developers, right? A developer can use Claude Code, for example, to prompt production-ready code and review that code. That's one scenario. But we also see now that business analysts, functional analysts, non-technical people can also start using these tools to quickly create these prototypes and get value from them, right? So it provides much faster time to market. Now we can prototype in hours instead of weeks, and we can present a prototype to a customer very quickly, collect their feedback, and make a much better solution in the end, right? Because business analysts and functional analysts can do these prototypes themselves, there's not a handover needed to a developer saying what to build in the prototype. They can do it themselves because they are the people who decide what features need to be built and how they should work, right? So we can, in the end, we can deliver more value at the same time, or we can do shorter projects and keeping the same scope. So we really believe, and we have seen firsthand in our projects now, that AI tools can really help speed things up, being more efficient on the development side and the prototyping side. Second element of our stool was the modular architecture, right? We discovered that rigid architectures, they're very quick to set up. For example, a monolithical platform from one vendor. It's easy to set up and to get started, but in the end, it will not be that flexible and scalable. And we really believe that scalability and flexibility are key when you look at the technological evolutions, right? So we believe in a modular architecture. That means that an architecture exists of different modules that can be easily swapped out, replaced down the road, and provide flexibility in that way. And it all starts, of course, if we break it down into different layers, into different components. We start with the first component on top there, what we call the front end. This is actually what the customers, the users of the portal will see. That is the front end of the application, right? And we believe the front end should be as dumb as possible, and there should not be that many business logic in there. It's purely visualization. The business logic is much lower in the stack, right? That means that this front end can more easily be adapted, more easily be developed upon or replaced without impacting the rest of the stack, right? So this front end should be as dumb as possible. And typically you have some public capabilities. For example, there maybe is a small knowledge base available without logging in, but the most of the features, of course, of a customer portal are for authenticated customers. So there's an authenticated capabilities here on the right with probably some federated authentication there to prevent customer having to log in multiple times, or he can use the same username and credentials that he uses across your organization. And what we typically see is that there is some sort of tag management available across these capabilities. That means that you can track how customers are using the portal, right? These are typically tracking codes that are inserted, so you can follow the behavior of the customer and see where the typical frictions are still in your portal and optimize using the data that you can gather. And second element we see that is coming back every time is having a well thought out design system. A design system ensures actually that the customer has the same look and feel across all your digital channels. This can be, for some organizations, a multi-brand design system if you're dealing with multiple brands in your organization, or sometimes a white label design system, that meaning it can be branded for subcontractors, for example, or for a certain partner that you have. And it contains, typically it contains a shared component library. Some organizations have development APIs and development documentation available that's there on the right. And then what we see is this front end part, it can be integrated, it should be integrated with your backend services using APIs. And these APIs make sure that these things are separated and can talk to each other using APIs. And these APIs ensure that you can swap out components very easily down the road without actually messing up your whole architecture, right? Or your whole solution. For example, it means you can swap the front end without impacting the back end, but also switch some back-end processes, some back-end services without impacting the front end. That is very key. An AI framework, for example, can be such a back-end component, which might need to be switched more often if we look at the evolutions we see. So some of the important capabilities we have there, typically in a portal, are you have a content lake where typical things like FAQs and knowledge base resides. Sometimes there's also digital assets. If you want to publish documentations in your portal, we typically consider that part of the content lake. Next to that, you have data lake. That's where customer data is stored. This can be, for example, your CRM system. It can have customer profiles, all the data of a customer, and also the segmentation of the customers if you want to personalize according to segment, for example. And there's a bunch of other capabilities you can have there, and also the integrations with your enterprise applications internally. And on the right-hand side, you see there, for example, integrations with ERP, if you're dealing with a commerce situation or you want to offer products to order. Maybe a system to do push notifications, to handle cases, case management. You see, but important in this picture to remember is these blue boxes, these backend services expose no front end to the end user. There is a separate front end on top, which is fully custom, which is lightweight, and which is as dumb as possible. This allows you actually to make evolutions on the front end independent from the backend and vice versa through that integration layer, right? So we also do not connect directly the front end to all these backend applications. We have this integration layer in between to make an abstraction. Otherwise, we need to build in this logic in the front end, which again doesn't make it that dumb anymore. So this architecture is really flexible. It is a modular architecture, and it allows you to more easily plug in AI down the road, right? So let's see how that looks like. If you want to build in AI-assisted support in such an architecture, like we mentioned in the beginning, nowadays customers often still have to deal with complex navigation to get to the right content, to get to the right information, to find an answer to their question in a traditional customer portal, right? And it decreases customer engagement. It's not the best experience. You often see these tiles in a customer portal, these different ways of navigating. You have a tile for FAQs typically, to look into your customer profile, to change your account. Maybe there's a page to contact customer support directly, some phone numbers. There's a knowledge base, a product database, for example, to place an order. All these different things, and the customer needs to find its way in there. And it's kind of messy, right? We also see this in typical websites where you have a rather complex navigation. Okay, so what we see is actually, what we believe is that things will shift in the coming years towards what we call a single pane of glass, what you can see there on the right. On the right-hand side, we see a single intent box, like we call this, where the customer describes actually what he's looking for. That can be his question, and we can provide an answer directly using a conversational interface, a chatbot-like interface. He can, for example, file an issue which he has with a product or a service directly through this intent box using natural language. So we will see that natural language will become the primary way of interacting for customers with customer service using this kind of single pane of glass. So in the past, we had various systems that were taped together using navigational patterns and complex search, sometimes with facets, etc., on the left-hand side. And we believe that this will move to this single pane of glass in the future, abstracting away all complexity which is in the backend. The complexity in the backend will still be there, but we look back at our architecture we just discussed. In a smart way, we can make sure that we can connect to all these backend applications using APIs, but in the front end, the customer has a very coherent and easy to use interface in using natural language, right? So it completely abstracts away what there is in the backend. So how can this work? If we take a deeper look here, using So for this single pane of glass, we typically want to use agentic AI to achieve this. This is not a simple chatbot that tries to answer your questions based on a knowledge base. We want to go one level deeper there. A simple chatbot with a knowledge base can be a first step, but if you take a look at the long term, we believe that agentic AI will have an important role there. Of course, this requires some organizational maturity on IT level and data governance, but this is a path that you can grow into. So what we first see there is the customer indeed talking to the single pane of glass in natural language, maybe uploading an image or using voice. That's possible using different systems, devices. For example, that can be a laptop, it can also be a mobile device, maybe even a smart speaker in the far future or in the near future even. And that single pane of glass in the end will push the request of the customer forward into our agentic framework, right? And that starts with the natural language understanding capability right there. That's the first step there where we use large language models. So the first step, so we're not just saying we have a single pane of glass, which is a chatbot using large language models and Gen AI. We break it down into components. So the first component is the natural language understanding. It uses a large language model to understand what the customer is actually meaning. What is his intent? So we detect the intention, right? And a large language model, one of the large language models that is available, for example, GPT-5, GPT-4o, or Google Gemini can be used there to understand what the customer is asking for, right? And then we go into a process where we actually use large language models to decide what steps the system should take to answer the question of the customer. So these steps are dynamically composed, like in an agentic AI, it's working like that. So for example, in this case, we take these 3 steps, and every one of these steps can be executed and call internal systems on your organization. We call them tools. And in this case, the system is calling 3 tools. And you can see this as your backend services, which we saw in the architectural diagram before. Some of these tools, like for example, a semantic search, will still use a large language model to provide answers to the customer. Other tools are, for example, getting a list of orders for the current customer, or book a meeting using an API. And we also see there the MCP popping up. MCP is actually a standard for agents or agentic frameworks to connect to your internal systems and model context protocol. And we will see in the future that IT departments will enable backend systems with MCP, so agentic processes or agentic frameworks can start communicating with your organizational backend systems using MCP. So this is something that will be on roadmap for IT in the coming years to enable that. After these steps are executed, an answer can be provided to the customer using large natural language generation, where we again use large language models to compose, to synthesize an answer and push it back to the customer, in also again back in natural language. So this is the flow that we take, going from understanding what the user or the customer is looking for, what his question is, if he wants to file an issue, and depending on his question, we execute dynamically a number of steps which are composed by the agentic framework in the right order and send back the response to the customer. So this is how we see that these things will work in the long term, and MCP, for example, will be a very important element there for your internal systems to be able to talk to this agentic framework. All right, so this is, like I mentioned before, a very long-term vision we have, and it requires you to grow a bit of maturity on IT and data governance in your organization. But there's also some more short-term things that you can do already with AI in your customer portal without going into this full-blown agentic framework. And we want to finish off with discussing a few of them. So how can you get started today with this, with AI technologies without actually taking this big leap, and maybe also without the risks of, for example, hallucinations of AI systems? And we want to take one use case to give you an example, and that's the use case of a traditional search system, right? Like I mentioned before, customers are now more and more expecting to be able to ask their question and get an immediate answer back, right? Where traditional search systems in portals and websites too are typically still keyword based. So if you try to enter a natural language query in there, like I did there on the screenshot, so how do I open an investment plan? You will get no results because it doesn't find an exact keyword match on my sentence. This is built for single keywords or 1 or 2, 3 keywords at maximum. So it is not designed to answer this question, right? So it doesn't understand my user intent if I ask such a question. It also ignores my language, spelling, and grammar. If you want to support these, you have to implement them specifically. So, for example, by providing a list of synonyms that are relevant for your business domain, installing different language packs to support different languages. So it's quite intense on the and maintenance heavy actually. So what we now see happening is that these traditional search systems can be easily replaced by what we call a semantic search system, and that's actually also using AI technologies to actually try to understand what the customer is meaning if he enters a natural language query. So on the left-hand side, we have a traditional keyword-based search where we're going to combine the keywords and do a search query. On the right-hand side, we have a semantic search system, which actually understands what the customer is asking there. So in this case, how rich is the actor who played Harry Potter? The system understands what we mean with how rich, that's about the net worth. And the actor who played Harry Potter, it's Daniel Radcliffe. The system understands this because it's using a large language model in the backend to deduct the meaning there. And then it actually passes this on to a semantic index, which can, again, provide the answer to the customer. But this is not, you can implement this in different ways, but the example, what we see here on the screen, it's only using a large language model to interpret what the customer is meaning, what the question is about, but the result that the customer is given, it's still a list of results, and the customer still has to click on the results and read the answer by himself. So we are only using large language model to understand the question of the user and to provide him the most relevant list of results, but we don't get into the risk of hallucinations or incorrect information by using a results list, right? And because we're using a large language model, we get synonyms, handling of stop words, translations, etc. You can ask questions in multiple languages in this system without actually coding them by hand, without implementing or configuring it manually. So we get this for free as part of the large language model. So this, we think, is a very interesting way to get started with AI technologies in your customer portal or even your public website without actually going into the risks of this technology by providing a results list instead of a conversational answer, a synthetic answer, right? So we believe this is the first step towards full conversational interfaces and the agentic framework that we discussed before. So to conclude, we want to summarize in 5 steps that you can take to work on your customer portal or to build a new customer portal. First of all, we start with defining what your goals are of the portal and also what the KPIs are that you want to use to measure success. For example, you want to reduce number of calls coming into the service center. We want to reduce it by 20%, for example. This is one of our goals with the portal. It's important to state that from the beginning so the teams know what to work on and how to measure success. Next, what we saw is deeply understand what your customer is, what the needs are of your customer, what his pain points are, what will be the features that help him the most or her the most. Next, we're going to identify and prioritize the different capabilities that we will implement in the portal, with the most important one on top, of course. We define a modular architecture to build a portal based on what capabilities that we want to support, and then we start designing, building, and releasing a first version. So an MVP, a minimum viable product, for example, get into the hands of the customer as soon as possible to start collecting data. So do not wait until you get a portal which is feature complete, which it will never be probably, but try to release it as soon as possible to your end customer, maybe a first version to collect this feedback, right? So we talked about 3 things today. We talked about putting the customer first, we talked about a modular architecture which enables you to plug in AI components down the road and to swap in, replace components down the road. It reduces your vendor lock-in. And we talked about AI, how you can use AI to prototype solutions, to build solutions, and to improve customer experience using, in the long term, agentic framework, which calls your internal systems using standards like MCP. And also, first step to get started using semantic search, which can already improve the search by a lot. Right? Okay, so that was our webinar for today. You can read a lot more on our mini website. We have some blog posts, recent blog posts published about customer portals. Please check them out. And we also already planned a second webinar for later this year on the topic of GEO. On the 16th of October, we're going to talk about how actually what is changing on, for example, the algorithms that Google is using. They're also implementing AI overviews and now in the States AI mode, which are becoming much more conversational and providing direct answers to your search queries in Google. How does that impact your click-through rate to your website? How can you measure that? And how can you make sure that your organization pops up in the answers that these chat tools like AI overviews or ChatGPT are given to the end customer? So this is something completely different from customer portals, but also tightly related to AI. So make sure to keep watching our public channels. Registrations will open very soon. All right. So thanks a lot, everybody, for joining, and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.